Sarah Chun always sat in the back row of the music room. She picked the seat behind the tall boy with curly hair so she could hide when the teacher asked questions. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30, she walked into room 204 with her head down, and her books held tight against her chest. The other students talked and laughed before class started. They shared stories about weekend parties and complained about math tests. Sarah listened but never joined in. She opened her notebook and drew small music notes in the margins. While waiting for Mrs. Rodriguez to begin the lesson, Mrs. Rodriguez was a short woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She had been teaching music at Lincoln High School for 23 years. She wore colorful scarves and always smelled like vanilla perfume. When she played the piano, her whole body moved with the music. The students liked her because she never yelled and always found something good to say about their work. Sarah had been taking music class for 2 years, but she never volunteered to perform. When Mrs. Rodriguez asked for students to play examples on the piano, Sarah looked down at her desk and hoped someone else would raise their hand. She knew the answers to most questions, but her voice came out as a whisper when she was called on. The music room had 15 old desks arranged in 3 rows. A large black piano sat in the front corner. The walls were covered with posters of famous musicians and basic music theory charts. One poster showed a timeline of music history, with pictures of Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. Another poster explained the difference between major and minor scales. Every day during lunch, Sarah walked past the music room on her way to the library. Most days, the room was empty and quiet, but sometimes she heard piano music coming from inside. The melodies were beautiful and complex, nothing like the simple songs they practiced in class. Sarah always wondered who was playing, but she was too shy to look inside. One rainy Thursday in February, Sarah finished her sandwich early and decided to walk around the school instead of sitting in the noisy cafeteria. Her shoes squeaked on the wet floors as she walked down the empty hallway. When she passed the music room, she heard the piano again. This time the music was soft and sad, like someone was telling a story without words. Sarah stopped walking and listened. The melody reminded her of her grandmother's house in the mountains, where everything was quiet except for the wind in the trees. She closed her eyes and let the music fill her mind. For a few minutes she forgot about her upcoming history test and the book report she needed to finish. The music stopped suddenly. Sarah opened her eyes and realized she had been standing in the hallway for several minutes. She needed to get to the library before lunch period ended. As she started to walk away, she heard footsteps coming toward the door. Sarah panicked. She did not want whoever was inside to see her listening. She quickly walked to the nearest bathroom and hid inside until the hallway was quiet again. When she came out, the music room door was closed and the hallway was empty for the rest of the day. Sarah could not stop thinking about the music. During English class, she found herself humming the melody quietly. In history class, she drew treble clefs in her notebook instead of taking notes about World War II. At dinner, her mother asked her 3 times to pass the salt before Sarah heard her. That night, Sarah lay in bed and tried to remember every note of the mysterious piano music. She had been taking piano lessons since she was 7 years old, but she had never heard anything so beautiful. Her own playing was technically correct but felt flat and boring. The music she heard at school had something else, something that made her chest feel tight and her eyes water. Sarah's bedroom was small and neat. Her piano books were stacked on her desk next to her homework. A small keyboard sat on a table by the window. She had begged her parents for a real piano, but their apartment was too small and real pianos cost too much money. Her parents, David and Linda Chun, worked hard to pay for Sarah's piano lessons. Her father fixed computers at a small shop downtown. Her mother cleaned offices at night after working at a grocery store during the day. They wanted Sarah to have opportunities they never had, but money was always tight. Sarah got up and sat at her keyboard. She put on headphones so she would not wake her parents and tried to play the melody she had heard. Her fingers moved slowly across the keys, searching for the right notes. After 30 minutes, she had figured out the main melody, but it did not sound the same. Something was missing. The next day, Sarah could not concentrate in any of her classes. She kept looking at the clock, waiting for lunchtime. When the bell finally rang, she walked quickly to the music room. She stood outside the door and listened. Carefully. She heard talking and laughing from the cafeteria down the hall, but the music room was silent. Sarah looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then she gently pushed the door open. The room was empty and dark. She stepped inside and turned on the lights. The piano sat in the corner like a sleeping giant. Sarah had never been alone in the music room before. It felt different without other students and Mrs. Rodriguez. She walked over to the piano and lifted the lid that covered the keys. The black and white keys gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She sat on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. The piano was much larger than her keyboard at home. The keys felt smooth and responsive under her fingers. She pressed middle, C, and listened to the rich, full sound that filled the room. Sarah began to play a simple scale, then moved to a piece she had memorized for her piano lessons. The sound was incredible. Every note was clear and powerful. She played louder than she ever dared to play at home. The music seemed to bounce off the walls and surround her. Without thinking, Sarah began to play the melody she had heard the day before. This time, her fingers found the notes more easily. She added her own harmony with her left hand and discovered that the melody sounded even better with simple chords underneath. As she played, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before. The music was not just coming from her fingers. It was coming from somewhere deep inside her chest. Her shoulders relaxed and her breathing became deeper. For the first time in months, she forgot to worry about anything. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Sarah stopped playing and quickly closed the piano lid. She grabbed her backpack and hurried toward the door. As she reached for the handle, she heard a voice behind her. That was beautiful. Sarah froze. She turned around slowly and saw Mrs. Rodriguez standing in the doorway. The teacher was holding a cup of coffee and smiling. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to." Mrs. Rodriguez walked into the room and set her coffee on her desk. "Sarah, how long have you been playing piano?" "Since I was 7, Sarah said, looking at the floor. "Who taught you to play like that?" Sarah looked up, confused. "Like what?" Mrs. Rodriguez sat down at her desk and studied Sarah's face with such feeling, such emotion. That was not just playing notes. That was making music. Sarah felt her cheeks turn red. She had never received a compliment about her piano playing from anyone except her parents, and they had to say nice things because they loved her. "I should go to class," Sarah said, moving toward the door. "Sarah, wait," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Can you stay for just a minute? I would like to talk to you about something." Sarah stood frozen by the door, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. Mrs. Rodriguez was looking at her with warm eyes, but Sarah felt trapped. She wanted to run to her next class and pretend this conversation never happened. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. "Please sit down," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pointing to a chair near her desk. "You are not in trouble, I promise." Sarah walked slowly to the chair and sat on the edge of it. She kept her backpack in her lap like a shield. Her next class was biology, and she was already 3 minutes late. Mrs. Peterson always marked students tardy if they were not in their seats when the bell rang. Mrs. Rodriguez picked up her coffee cup and took a small sip. She was quiet for a moment, as if she was choosing her words carefully. Sarah stared at a poster on the wall that showed different types of musical instruments. She had looked at that poster hundreds of times during music class, but now she studied it like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez said finally, "how long have you been coming here during lunch to play piano?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She thought she had been careful. She thought no one knew about her secret visits to the music room. Her voice came out as a whisper when she answered, "Just yesterday and today." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "I think you have been coming here longer than that. I have heard beautiful piano music during lunch for the past 3 weeks." The music was too good to be coming from a beginning student. Sarah felt her face turn hot. She had been caught. Now, Mrs. Rodriguez would probably tell her she could not use the music room anymore. Maybe she would even call Sarah's parents and tell them their daughter was sneaking around the school. "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked. "Oh no, dear, not at all." Mrs. Rodriguez set down her coffee cup and leaned forward in her chair. "I want to talk to you about something exciting. Something that could be wonderful for you." Sarah looked up for the first time since sitting down. Mrs. Rodriguez was smiling the way she did when a student finally understood a difficult concept. Her eyes were bright and enthusiastic. "Every year in April, our school has a talent showcase," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "Students perform music, dance, comedy, and other talents for their families and friends. It is always a beautiful evening, and the students love sharing their gifts with everyone." Sarah had heard about the talent showcase. Every year, the popular kids talked about their performances for weeks before and after the event. Last year, Jessica Martinez sang a song from a Broadway musical and got a standing ovation. Tom Bradley played guitar and sang a rock song that made everyone cheer. Sarah had never considered participating. She was not the type of person who performed in front of crowds. "I would like you to consider performing in this year's showcase," Mrs. Rodriguez said. The words hit Sarah like cold water. She gripped her backpack tighter and shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I could never do that. I am not good enough. I am not like the other kids who perform." Mrs. Rodriguez reached across her desk and gently touched Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I have been teaching music for 23 years. I have heard thousands of students play piano. What I heard you playing just now was special. It was not just technically correct, it had soul." Sarah did not know what to say. No one had ever told her she had soul before. Her piano teacher, Mr. Kim, always focused on playing the right notes at the right time. He never talked about soul or feeling. He just wanted her to pass her examinations and move to the next level book. "I really cannot perform in front of people," Sarah said. "I get nervous just answering questions in class. I would probably faint on stage. Double quotes. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded understandingly. "I know it seems scary. Many musicians feel nervous before they perform. Even famous concert pianists get butterflies in their stomachs." She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled out a thick folder and brought it back to her desk. Inside the folder were photographs from previous talent showcases. She spread several photos across her desk so Sarah could see them. "Look at these pictures," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Every single one of these students was nervous before they performed, but look at their faces while they are on stage." Sarah looked at the photos. In one picture, a girl was singing into a microphone with her eyes closed and a huge smile on her face. In another photo, a boy was playing violin with such concentration that he looked like nothing else in the world mattered. A third photo showed twin sisters dancing together, laughing as they moved. "They look happy," Sarah said quietly. "Exactly. When you are sharing something you love, the nervousness goes away. It gets replaced by joy." Mrs. Rodriguez pulled out one more photo. It showed a young man sitting at the piano, his fingers flying across the keys. His face was focused but peaceful. Sarah recognized the piano as the same one she had just been playing. "This is Marcus Williams. He graduated 5 years ago. When I first suggested he perform in the talent showcase, he told me the same thing you just told me. He said he was not good enough and he would be too nervous." Sarah studied Marcus's face. In the photo, he did not look nervous at all. He looked like he belonged at that piano. "What happened?" Sarah asked. "He performed a beautiful piece by Chopin." The audience was completely silent during his performance, and when he finished, they gave him the longest standing ovation in the history of our talent showcase. But more importantly, Marcus discovered something about himself that night. He realized that music was not just his hobby, it was his passion. Mrs. Rodriguez put the photos back in the folder. Marcus is now studying music at a top university. He received a full scholarship because of his talent. But it all started with one performance in our little school auditorium. Sarah tried to imagine herself sitting at a piano on a stage with hundreds of people watching her. The thought made her stomach feel sick. But at the same time, a tiny part of her was curious. What would it feel like to share her music with other people? I do not think I am ready for something like that, Sarah said. Mrs. Rodriguez sat back down and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. What if I told you that you could perform something simple? Something that would not be too challenging or scary? What do you mean? Well, instead of performing a difficult classical piece, you could play something that most people know and love, a simple, beautiful melody that would be comfortable for you and enjoyable for the audience. Sarah thought about this. Playing a simple song did sound less frightening than trying to perform a complex piece that might go wrong. What kind of simple song? She asked of Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. There is a beautiful ballad called The Way You Look Tonight. It is an old song, but it is timeless. People of all ages know it and love it. The melody is gentle and flowing, and it would be perfect for your style of playing. Sarah had heard that song before. Her grandmother used to hum it while she cooked dinner. It was pretty and peaceful, not dramatic or showy like some of the songs other students performed. I could arrange it in a simple way that would showcase your natural musicality without being too complicated, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. You would have 2 months to practice, and I would help you every step of the way. I do not know, Sarah said. What if I make mistakes? What if people do not like it? Sarah, let me ask you something. When you were playing piano just now, how did you feel? Sarah thought about the question. When she was playing, she had felt different than usual. She felt calm and happy and free. I felt good, she admitted. That feeling is what music is all about. When you share that feeling with other people, you give them a gift. You help them feel something beautiful, too. The bell rang, signaling the start of the next class period. Sarah realized she had missed her entire biology class. Mrs. Peterson would definitely mark her absent, and Sarah would have to get notes from another student. I need to go, Sarah said, standing up. Of course. But Sarah, will you think about what I have said? You do not have to decide right now. Take some time to consider it. Sarah walked toward the door, then stopped and turned around. Mrs. Rodriguez. Why do you think I should do this? Why me? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled warmly. Because, dear, you have something special. You have the ability to touch people's hearts with your music. That is a rare gift, and it should not be hidden away. As Sarah walked to her locker to get her books for the next class, her mind was spinning. She had never thought of herself as someone with a special gift. She was just Sarah Chun, the quiet girl who sat in the back row and never raised her hand, but Mrs. Rodriguez seemed to see something in her that she did not see in herself. The teacher had been working with students for more than 20 years. Maybe she knew something that Sarah did not know. That evening at dinner, Sarah's parents asked about her day as usual. Sarah almost told them about her conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, but something held her back. She was not ready to talk about it yet. She needed time to think. After dinner, Sarah went to her room and sat at her small keyboard. She put on her headphones and began to play. As her fingers moved across the keys, she tried to imagine what it would feel like to play for an audience. The thought still scared her, but it also made her feel something else, something that might have been excitement. For 3 days, Sarah could not stop thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's invitation. She went through her normal routine of classes, homework, and piano practice, but her mind kept wandering to the talent showcase. Every time she imagined herself on stage, her hands started to sweat and her stomach felt tight. On Friday afternoon, Sarah found herself walking past the music room again during lunch. She could hear Mrs. Rodriguez inside, playing scales on the piano. Sarah stood outside the door for 5 minutes, trying to decide whether to go inside. Finally, she knocked softly. Come in. Mrs. Rodriguez called. Sarah opened the door and stepped inside. Mrs. Rodriguez was sitting at the piano with sheet music spread across the top. She looked up and smiled when she saw Sarah. Hello, dear. How are you today? I have been thinking about what you said, Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. About the talent showcase. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped playing and turned to face Sarah completely. And what have you decided? Sarah took a deep breath. I think I want to try. But I'm still very scared. Mrs. Rodriguez's face lit up with joy. She stood up and walked over to Sarah, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That is wonderful news. And it is perfectly normal to feel scared. Fear means that something is important to you. Sarah nodded, though she was not sure she understood what Mrs. Rodriguez meant. All she knew was that her heart was racing just from saying yes. When is the showcase? Sarah asked. April 15th. That gives us exactly 8 weeks to prepare. We will take it slowly and make sure you feel confident and ready. Mrs. Rodriguez walked to her desk and pulled out a piece of sheet music. This is the arrangement I made for you. It is the way you look tonight, just like I mentioned. But I have simplified it so it will be comfortable for your skill level. Sarah looked at the music. The notes looked familiar and manageable. There were no difficult key changes or complicated rhythms. The melody line was clear and beautiful, with simple chord progressions in the left hand. It looks easier than I expected, Sarah said. That is the point. This piece will let your natural musicality shine through without overwhelming you with technical challenges. The most important thing is that you feel confident and can focus on expressing the emotion of the song. Mrs. Rodriguez sat back down at the piano and began to play the arrangement. The melody was indeed simple, but it was also incredibly beautiful. The way she played it made Sarah think of old movies and romantic dinners and couples dancing under the stars. Can you hear how much feeling is in this simple melody? Mrs. Rodriguez asked as she finished playing. Sarah nodded. Even though the piece was not technically difficult, it had touched something deep inside her chest. Now you try, Mrs. Rodriguez said, standing up from the piano bench. Sarah sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. She played through the first page slowly, reading the notes carefully. The melody felt good under her fingers, like pudding on a comfortable sweater. Excellent, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Take this music home and practice it this weekend. Do not worry about making it perfect yet. Just get familiar with the notes and the rhythm. That weekend, Sarah practiced the piece for hours. She played it on her small keyboard at home, using headphones so her parents could not hear. At first, she focused on learning the notes and playing them correctly. But by Sunday evening, she was starting to add her own small touches to the music. On Monday, Sarah met with Mrs. Rodriguez during lunch to play the piece. Mrs. Rodriguez listened carefully and made helpful suggestions about timing and expression. You are learning it very quickly, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But remember, this is not just about playing the right notes. Think about the story the song is telling. What emotions do you feel when you hear this melody? Sarah thought about the question. It makes me feel calm, but also a little sad, like remembering something beautiful from a long time ago. Perfect. Try to play it with those feelings. Sarah played the piece again, this time thinking about the emotions instead of just the notes. The music sounded different. It was warmer and more expressive. Much better, Mrs. Rodriguez said. You are beginning to understand what it means to make music instead of just playing notes. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah met with Mrs. Rodriguez 3 times a week during lunch. Each session, her playing improved. She was becoming more comfortable with the piece and starting to add her own interpretation to the melody. As the showcase got closer, Sarah's nervousness grew stronger. At night, she lay in bed imagining all the things that could go wrong. She might forget the music in the middle of the performance. She might play the wrong notes. She might freeze up completely and not be able to play at all. One evening at dinner, Sarah's mother noticed that she was pushing her food around her plate instead of eating. Sarah, you seem worried about something. Is everything okay at school? Sarah looked up at her parents. They were both watching her with concerned expressions. She had been keeping the talent showcase a secret for 3 weeks, but suddenly she felt like she needed to tell someone. I am performing in the school talent showcase next month, she said quietly. Her father nearly choked on his water. You are doing what? Mrs. Rodriguez asked me to play piano in the talent showcase. I said yes, but now I think I made a mistake. Sarah's mother reached across the table and took her hand. Honey, that is wonderful news. We are so proud of you. But what if I'm terrible? What if everyone laughs at me? Her father set down his fork and looked at Sarah seriously. Sarah, you have been playing piano for 8 years. You are very talented. If your teacher thinks you are ready to perform, then you probably are. But I have never played in front of a big audience before. What if I get too nervous and mess up? Sarah's mother squeezed her hand gently. Everyone gets nervous when they try something new. That does not mean you should not try. Some of the best experiences in life come from doing things that scare us a little. That night, Sarah's parents came to her room to talk with her more about the showcase. They sat on her bed while she explained about the song she was learning and how Mrs. Rodriguez was helping her prepare. We would love to hear you play the piece, her mother said. Sarah felt shy about playing for her parents, but she also wanted their support. She sat at her keyboard and played "The Way You Look Tonight" from beginning to end. When she finished, both of her parents were smiling. That was beautiful, Sarah, her father said. I had no idea you could play like that. Really? Really? You made that simple song sound like something special. Despite her parents' encouragement, Sarah's anxiety continued to grow as the showcase approached. During her practice sessions with Mrs. Rodriguez, she started making mistakes she had never made before. Her fingers felt clumsy and her timing was off. I think I should quit, Sarah told Mrs. Rodriguez during a particularly frustrating practice session. I am getting worse instead of better. Mrs. Rodriguez sat down next to Sarah on the piano bench. What you are experiencing is very normal. As the performance gets closer, many musicians start to doubt themselves. It is called performance anxiety. Maybe I am just not cut out for performing. Sarah, do you remember how you felt the first time I heard you playing alone in this room? Sarah thought back to that day. I felt happy. I felt free. That feeling is still inside you. The anxiety you are feeling now is just fear talking. It is not the truth about your abilities. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up and walked to her desk. She pulled out a photo and handed it to Sarah. It was the picture of Marcus Williams playing piano at the showcase. I showed you this picture before, but I did not tell you the whole story. The week before Marcus performed, he came to me and said exactly what you just said. He wanted to quit because he was making mistakes in practice. Sarah looked at the photo. Marcus looked so confident and peaceful. What did you tell him? I told him that the mistakes he was making in practice were not important. What mattered was that he had the music inside him. And on the night of the performance, when he sat down at that piano, all the practice and preparation came together perfectly. Sarah handed the photo back to Mrs. Rodriguez. But what if that does not happen for me? It will happen. I have seen you play this piece beautifully. Dozens of times. You know it by heart. When you are on that stage, surrounded by people who want to hear beautiful music, your natural instincts will take over. That evening, Sarah practiced at home with a new determination. Instead of focusing on her mistakes, she tried to remember the feeling of joy she had when she played music for herself. She played the piece slowly and carefully. Paying attention to every note and every emotion as she played, Sarah realized something important. The song no longer felt like something she was learning. It felt like something that belonged to her. She had made it her own through weeks of practice and thought, but even with this realization, Sarah still felt nervous about the upcoming performance. She had never done anything like this before. She was stepping into unknown territory, and that was terrifying. 2 weeks before the showcase, Mrs. Rodriguez suggested that Sarah perform the piece for a small group of people as practice. Just a few of my other music students, Mrs. Rodriguez said. It will help you get used to playing for an audience. Sarah agreed, though her stomach immediately started churning with nerves. April 15th arrived gray and cloudy. Sarah woke up at 6 in the morning, even though her alarm was set for 7. She had been awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the performance that would happen in just 12 hours. She went to the kitchen and tried to eat breakfast, but everything tasted like cardboard. Her mother had made her favorite pancakes, but Sarah could only manage 2 small bites before pushing the plate away. You need to eat something, her mother said gently. You will need energy for tonight. I cannot eat. My stomach feels too nervous. Her father looked up from his coffee. Sarah, it is normal to feel nervous before a big performance. Even professional musicians get butterflies. Sarah nodded, but she wondered if professional musicians felt like throwing up every 5 minutes. She had never experienced anxiety this intense before. It felt like her whole body was buzzing with electricity. At school that day, Sarah could barely concentrate on her classes. During math, she stared at algebra problems without seeing the numbers. In English, she read the same paragraph 3 times without understanding what it meant. Her friends noticed that something was different about her. "Are you okay?" asked Emma during lunch. "You seem really distracted today." Sarah had not told any of her friends about the talent showcase. She was afraid they would think she was crazy. "For agreeing to perform, I am fine," she lied. "Just tired." During music class, Mrs. Rodriguez gave Sarah an encouraging smile, but did not say anything about the performance. Sarah was grateful for this. She did not want the other students to know what was happening that evening. After school, Sarah went home and tried to practice her piece one more time, but her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. She made mistakes in places where she had never made mistakes before. After 10 minutes, she gave up and closed the piano lid. "This is hopeless," she said to herself. "I am going to embarrass myself tonight." At 5 o'clock, Sarah's parents drove her back to school. The talent showcase was scheduled to begin at 7, but performers needed to arrive early for a sound check and final preparations. The school parking lot was already half full when they arrived. Sarah saw students carrying guitar cases and costume bags. Some of them looked excited and confident. Others looked as nervous as Sarah felt. "We will see you after the show," her mother said, giving Sarah a tight hug. "Break a leg." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. Her father laughed. "It means good luck. It is what people say to performers before a show." Sarah walked into the school through the main entrance. The hallways were buzzing with activity. Students were hurrying toward the auditorium with their instruments and props. Teachers were directing traffic and checking names off lists. Sarah found her way to the music room, where Mrs. Rodriguez had told her to meet. Inside, she found 6 other student performers sitting in chairs and looking various degrees of nervous. "Sarah." "There you are," Mrs. Rodriguez said warmly. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Sarah answered honestly. Mrs. Rodriguez put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "That is perfectly normal. Everyone in this room is feeling nervous right now." Sarah looked around at the other students. Jessica Martinez was there with her sheet music for another Broadway song. Tom Bradley was tuning his guitar. A girl named Ashley was practicing dance moves in the corner. "Do you all feel nervous?" Sarah asked the group. "Oh yeah," said Tom. "My hands are shaking so much I can barely hold my guitar pick. I threw up twice already," added Ashley. "But my dance teacher says that means I care about doing well." Jessica nodded. "Last year, I was so nervous I forgot the words to my song in the middle of the performance. But somehow I kept going and it turned out okay." Sarah felt a little better knowing that she was not the only one who was scared. These were students who had performed before, and they were still nervous. Mrs. Rodriguez clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone. It is time to go to the auditorium for sound check. Remember, this is just a technical rehearsal. You will each play or sing a small portion of your piece so the sound technician can adjust the microphones and lighting." The group walked together down the hall toward the auditorium. Sarah could hear voices and laughter coming from inside. When they reached the entrance, Mrs. Rodriguez opened the doors and Sarah got her first look at the space where she would be performing. The Lincoln High School auditorium was much bigger than Sarah had imagined. There were hundreds of red velvet seats arranged in rows that stretched back into the darkness. The stage was enormous, with bright lights hanging from the ceiling and heavy curtains on either side. Sarah's knees felt weak. She had never seen the auditorium from this angle before. Usually she sat in the audience for school assemblies and looked up at the stage. Now she was going to be the one standing up there while everyone else looked at her. "It is bigger than I remembered," she whispered to Mrs. Rodriguez. It seems big now because it is empty, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. Once it is full of people who want to hear beautiful music, it will feel more welcoming. Sarah was not sure she believed this, but she nodded anyway. The sound check went quickly. Each performer went on stage one at a time and performed a small section of their act. Sarah watched from the wings as the other students took their turns. Tom played the first verse of his rock song, and his guitar sounded powerful through the sound system. Jessica sang a few lines of her Broadway number, and her voice filled the entire auditorium. When it was Sarah's turn, she walked slowly to the piano in the center of the stage. The bright lights were so intense that she could not see the empty seats in the audience. This was both good and bad. Good because she did not have to see how big the space was. Bad because the lights made everything feel strange and dreamlike. Sarah sat down at the piano bench and adjusted her position. The piano was a beautiful black grand piano, much nicer than the upright piano in the music room. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play the first section of The Way You Look Tonight. The sound was incredible. The piano's voice filled the auditorium with rich, warm tones. Even though Sarah was nervous, she could hear how beautiful the music sounded in this space. "Thank you, Sarah," called the sound technician from the back of the auditorium. "That sounded perfect." Sarah stood up from the piano and walked off the stage. Her legs were shaking, but she had made it through the sound check without any major problems. Back in the music room, the performers had an hour to wait before the show began. Sarah tried to review her sheet music one more time, but the notes seemed to blur together on the page. Her mind felt foggy and unfocused. At 6:30, Mrs. Rodriguez gathered all the performers together for a final pep talk. "In 30 minutes, you will each have the opportunity to share your talents with an audience of people who care about you," she began. "Your families and friends are out there waiting to be entertained and inspired by what you have prepared." Sarah peeked out the door and saw that the hallways were now crowded with parents and students arriving for the show. She caught a glimpse of her own parents walking toward the auditorium entrance. Her mother was carrying flowers, probably for Sarah to receive after her performance. "Remember," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "the audience wants you to succeed. They are not hoping for you to make mistakes. They want to enjoy your performance and feel proud of you." At exactly 7 o'clock, Sarah heard the sound of the auditorium doors closing and the audience settling into their seats. The show was about to begin. Mrs. Rodriguez lined up the performers in the order they would appear on stage. Sarah was scheduled to perform fifth, after Tom's guitar song but before Jessica's Broadway number. This felt like a good position to her. She would not have to wait too long, but she would also have time to see how the first few acts went. The show began with a comedy routine, performed by two junior boys who told jokes and did funny impressions of the teachers. Sarah could hear the audience laughing through the walls of the music room. The sound made her feel both better and worse. Better because the audience seemed friendly and receptive. Worse because she realized how many people were really out there. The second act was a dance routine performed by three senior girls. Sarah could hear the music and the sound of their tap shoes on the stage floor. When they finished, the audience applauded enthusiastically. The third act was a girl named Monica who sang a country song while playing acoustic guitar. Her voice was sweet and clear, and the audience loved her. The fourth act was Tom with his rock song. Sarah had heard him practice many times, but hearing him perform for a real audience was different. He sounded confident and professional. When he finished, the audience cheered loudly. "Sarah, you are next," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. Sarah stood up on shaky legs. This was it. There was no more waiting, no more practicing, no more preparing. In 2 minutes, she would be sitting at that piano in front of hundreds of people. As she walked toward the stage entrance, Sarah felt like she was moving through water. Everything seemed slow and surreal. She could hear the master of ceremonies on stage introducing her act. "Our next performer is Sarah Chan, a sophomore who will be playing a beautiful piano arrangement of the classic song, The Way You Look Tonight." Sarah walked across the stage with careful steps. The bright lights made everything feel like a dream. She could not see the audience because of the glare, but she could feel them watching her. Hundreds of people sitting in the darkness, waiting. For her to begin, the black grand piano sat in the center of the stage like a sleeping giant. Sarah had played this piano during soundcheck just 2 hours ago, but now it seemed different, more important. More frightening. She reached the piano bench and stood beside it for a moment. Her heart was beating so fast, she wondered if the audience could hear it through the microphones. Her hands felt cold and slightly damp. She wiped them quickly on her dress before sitting down. The piano bench was the right height, just as it had been during soundcheck. Sarah adjusted her position slightly and placed her feet on the pedals. She could feel the smooth wood of the bench beneath her and the cool metal of the pedals under her shoes. The auditorium was completely quiet. Sarah had never experienced silence like this before. It felt heavy and expectant, like the whole world was holding its breath waiting for her to begin. She placed her hands on the piano keys and felt their familiar smoothness. These keys were her friends. She had been touching piano keys since she was 7 years old. This was not different from practice, she told herself. There was just piano keys and music. The same as always. Sarah took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of "The Way You Look Tonight" floated gently into the auditorium. The melody was soft and sweet, exactly as she had practiced it hundreds of times. Her left hand played simple chords while her right hand carried the beautiful melody line. For the first few measures, Sarah played exactly as she had learned the piece. Every note was in the right place. Every rhythm was correct. The music was pretty and pleasant, just as Mrs. Rodriguez had arranged it. As she played, Sarah began to relax slightly. The notes were coming easily, flowing from her fingers without effort. This was the same song she had been practicing for 8 weeks. She knew every note by heart. The audience listened politely. Sarah could sense their attention, even though she could not see their faces. They seemed to be enjoying the gentle melody. It was the kind of music that made people think of old movies and romantic dinners. Sarah played through the first verse of the song exactly as written. The arrangement was simple but beautiful. Mrs. Rodriguez had chosen well. This was not too difficult for Sarah's skill level, but it was elegant enough to impress an audience. As she moved into the second verse, Sarah felt her confidence growing. She was not making any mistakes. Her timing was steady and her touch was controlled. Everything was going according to plan. The melody continued to flow from the piano, filling the large auditorium with warm, comfortable sound. Sarah had worried that her playing would sound small in such a big space, but the grand piano's voice was rich and full. Every note carried clearly to the back of the room. Sarah began to notice things about the music that she had never noticed during practice. The way certain notes seemed to hang in the air for a moment before fading. The way the harmony in her left hand supported and lifted the melody in her right hand. The way the piano sound seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. For the first time since walking onto the stage, Sarah started to feel something other than nervousness. She felt a small spark of the joy that music usually brought her. This was still scary, but it was also beautiful. The audience continued to listen attentively. Sarah could feel their presence, but it no longer felt threatening. They seemed like friends who had come to hear her play. People who wanted her to succeed. As she played the bridge section of the song, Sarah found herself thinking about the words, even though this was an instrumental arrangement. The Way You Look Tonight. It was a song about seeing beauty in someone you love, about how love makes ordinary moments feel magical. Sarah had never been in love, but she understood the feeling the song was trying to express. It was about finding something perfect in an imperfect world. About how the right moment could make everything else disappear. The bridge section ended, and Sarah moved back into the main melody for the final verse. This was the part of the song she had always loved most during practice. The melody seemed to reach up toward something beautiful and then settle back down with satisfaction. As she played these familiar notes, Sarah realized something surprising. She was no longer afraid. The nervousness that had been eating at her stomach all day was gone. In its place was something warm and peaceful. She was doing it. She was actually performing on stage in front of hundreds of people, and it was going, well, better than well. It was exactly as it should be. The music felt different here on stage than it had during practice. It felt more alive, more important. Playing for an audience gave the notes extra meaning. She was not just playing music. She was sharing something beautiful with other people. Sarah had always thought of piano as a solitary activity, something she did alone in her room or during private lessons. But now she understood that music was meant to be shared. It was meant to create connections between people. The final section of the song approached. Sarah had practiced this ending so many times that her fingers knew exactly where to go. The melody would slow down gradually, becoming softer and more gentle, until it finally came to rest on a peaceful final chord. But as she began to play this final section, something unexpected happened. Sarah felt a sudden urge to add something to the music. Not something complicated or showy. Just a small change that would make the ending more expressive. During all her weeks of practice, Sarah had played the piece exactly as Mrs. Rodriguez had written it. She had been focused on getting every note right and not making mistakes. But now, in this moment, she felt brave enough to add her own small touch. Instead of playing the melody straight, as written, Sarah added a gentle ornament to one of the notes. It was nothing dramatic, just a small grace note that made the phrase sound more personal, more like something she would play when she was alone and feeling peaceful. The ornament fit perfectly with the song. It did not sound out of place or wrong. It sounded like something that had always belonged there. Encouraged by this small success, Sarah made another tiny change. She held one of the chords slightly longer than written, letting its harmony ring in the air before moving to the next note. Again, it sounded natural and right. These were not big changes. Anyone in the audience who did not know the original arrangement would never notice them. But to Sarah, they felt revolutionary. She was not just playing notes that someone else had written. She was making the music her own. The song continued toward its ending. Sarah played with growing confidence, adding small personal touches here and there, a slight change in dynamics, a tiny pause that created suspense, a chord that she voiced slightly differently to make it sound warmer. Each change felt natural and musical. Sarah was not trying to show off or prove anything. She was simply following her instincts about how the music should sound. As she played, Sarah became aware that the audience was very still. She could not see them, but she could sense their attention in a way she had never experienced before. They were not just listening politely anymore. They were truly engaged with the music. This realization filled Sarah with a warm feeling of connection. She was communicating with hundreds of people through her piano playing. Without words, without explanation, she was sharing something beautiful with them. The final phrase of the song arrived. Sarah played it with gentle care, letting each note ring clearly before moving to the next. The melody descended slowly, like a bird settling onto a branch, and then came the final chord. Sarah had practiced this chord thousands of times. It was a simple, peaceful harmony that brought the song to a quiet close. She pressed the keys gently and let the sound fade naturally into silence. For a moment after the music ended, the auditorium remained completely quiet. Sarah kept her hands on the keys, not sure if she should move. The silence stretched on, and Sarah began to worry that something was wrong. Had she made a mistake without realizing it? Had the audience not liked her performance? Why was no one clapping? Then, like thunder rolling across a quiet valley, the applause began. The applause started slowly, like raindrops beginning to fall. A few people in the front rows began clapping, and then more joined in, but Sarah barely heard it. Something incredible was happening inside her mind. As she sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, Sarah felt a strange sensation. It was as if a door had opened in her chest, and all the music she had ever heard was rushing out at once. The simple arrangement of "The Way You Look Tonight" suddenly seemed like just the beginning of something much bigger. She looked down at her fingers on the black and white keys. These keys had become her friends over the past 8 weeks, but now they felt like something more. They felt like a language she could speak fluently. a way to express things that had no words. The applause continued around her, but Sarah was lost in her own thoughts. She had played the song exactly as planned, with just a few small personal touches. But as the sound of clapping filled the auditorium, she realized something that surprised her. Completely, she did not want to stop playing. The feeling was so strong and unexpected that it made her heart race again. But this time it was not fear. That made her pulse quicken. It was excitement. Pure, electric excitement. Sarah had spent 8 weeks learning this one simple song. She had practiced it until she could play it perfectly, exactly as Mrs. Rodriguez had arranged it. But now, sitting on this stage with an audience listening to her, she suddenly understood that the written music was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Without really deciding to do it, Sarah began to play again. The audience was still clapping when the first notes came from the piano. The clapping gradually stopped as people realized that Sarah was not finished. She was starting the song over again, but this time something was different. This time, Sarah began with the melody in her right hand, but her left hand started doing things that were not in the original arrangement. Instead of simple chords, she played a walking bass line that gave the song a gentle swing rhythm. It was something she had heard in jazz recordings, and somehow her fingers knew how to create it. The melody stayed the same, but everything underneath it became more interesting. Sarah was not reading music anymore. She was playing from her heart, letting her hands do what felt natural and right. Mrs. Rodriguez, watching from the wings, felt her eyes grow wide with amazement. This was not the simple arrangement she had given Sarah to learn. This was something entirely new. Something that Sarah was creating in real time. In the audience, Sarah's parents leaned forward in their seats. They had heard Sarah practice piano at home for years, but they had never heard her play like this. The music coming from the stage was confident and sophisticated in a way that seemed impossible for their shy daughter. Sarah played through the melody again, but this time she added ornaments and variations that made each phrase sound fresh and new. Her right hand danced around the basic melody, adding grace notes and small flourishes that sparkled like jewelry. But the most amazing thing was not what Sarah was playing, it was how she was playing it. All the stiffness and nervousness were gone. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing was deep and steady, and her face showed a kind of peaceful concentration that made her look years older. As she played, Sarah felt like she was discovering abilities she never knew she had. Her left hand seemed to know exactly what chords would sound good under each melody note. Her right hand found decorations and variations without any conscious effort. It was as if all the music she had ever learned was suddenly available to her at once. The audience sat in complete silence, mesmerized by what they were hearing. This was not the simple, pleasant performance they had expected. This was something special, something that made them forget they were sitting in a high school auditorium listening to a student recital. Sarah moved into the bridge section of the song again, but this time she made it her own completely. She changed the harmony, making it richer and more complex. She altered the rhythm, giving it unexpected accents that made the music feel alive and spontaneous. Her fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that amazed even her. She was not thinking about what notes to play next. She was simply following the music wherever it wanted to go. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood what Mrs. Rodriguez had meant when she talked about making music instead of just playing notes. She was not reproducing something that someone else had written. She was creating something new in this very moment. The music filled the auditorium with warmth and energy. Even people who did not usually listen to piano music found themselves drawn into Sarah's performance. There was something about the way she played that spoke directly to their emotions. Sarah played through the song a third time, and this time she made it even more elaborate. She added a counter melody in her left hand that wove around the main tune like a musical conversation. She created moments of tension and release that made the audience hold their breath and then sigh with satisfaction. But the most remarkable thing was that none of these changes sounded forced or artificial. Everything Sarah added seemed to belong naturally to the song. It was as if she was uncovering layers of music that had always been hidden inside the simple melody. As she played, Sarah felt a joy unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was what she had been searching for all her life without knowing it, this feeling of complete freedom and expression. This sense that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The audience was completely captivated. Parents who had come to support their own children found themselves forgetting why they were there. Teachers who had heard hundreds of student performances sat with their mouths slightly open. Other students who were waiting backstage to perform stopped thinking about their own nervousness and simply listened in wonder. Sarah began to build toward a finale that was not in any written music. She took the simple melody of "The Way You Look Tonight" and transformed it into something magnificent. Her left hand played rich, complex chords while her right hand spun variations on the melody that grew more elaborate with each repetition. The music swelled and soared, filling every corner of the auditorium. Sarah played with passion and skill that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. She was not the shy, quiet girl who sat in the back row of music class anymore. She was a musician, expressing herself through the language of music. As the music reached its peak, Sarah felt like she was flying. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every chord change felt inevitable and perfect. She was not fighting the music or trying to control it. She was simply letting it flow through her and out into the world. The improvised finale grew more and more elaborate, but it never lost its connection to the original melody. Sarah wove the familiar tune through increasingly complex harmonies and rhythms, creating a musical journey that took the audience from the simple beauty of the original song to heights they had never imagined. And then, with perfect musical instinct, Sarah began to bring the performance back down to earth. She gradually simplified the harmonies and slowed the rhythm. The elaborate decorations fell away, leaving just the pure, simple melody that had started it all, but even this returned to simplicity was transformed by everything that had come before. The melody now carried the weight of all the musical adventures Sarah had taken the audience on. It sounded both familiar and completely new. Sarah played the final chord with gentle finality. It was the same chord that ended the original arrangement, but now it felt like the conclusion to an epic musical journey. The note hung in the air for a long moment and then faded into perfect silence. The auditorium remained quiet for what felt like an eternity. Sarah sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, hardly able to believe what had just happened. She had begun the evening planning to play a simple, safe arrangement of a familiar song. Instead, she had discovered that she could create music that touched people's hearts in ways she had never dreamed possible. Then the silence exploded into sound. The silence broke like a dam bursting. The entire auditorium erupted in applause so loud and sudden that Sarah jumped on the piano bench. But this was not ordinary clapping. This was something much more powerful. People were not just clapping their hands. They were cheering, whistling, and shouting. Sarah heard voices calling "Bravo" and "Amazing" from different parts of the auditorium. She had never heard an audience reaction like this before. The applause kept growing louder instead of fading away. More and more people were standing up from their seats. Sarah could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the stage lights. The entire audience was rising to give her a standing ovation. Sarah sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the wall of sound washing over her. She had expected polite clapping when she finished her simple song. She had never imagined anything like this. The noise was so intense it seemed to make the air vibrate around her. In the wings, Mrs. Rodriguez was clapping so hard her hands hurt. Tears were streaming down her face as she watched. Her quiet student received the kind of ovation that professional musicians dream about. She had known Sarah was talented, but what had just happened on stage was beyond anything she had imagined possible. The other student performers, waiting backstage, stood with their mouths open. Tom, who had felt confident about his rock song performance, now realized he had witnessed something extraordinary. Jessica, who had won talent shows before, knew she had just seen the performance of a lifetime. How did she do that? whispered Ashley, the dancer. She turned that simple song into something incredible. I did not know anyone at our school could play piano like that, said Mike, shaking his head in amazement. In the audience, Sarah's parents were on their feet with everyone else, clapping until their palms stung. Her mother was crying openly, and her father kept saying, "That's our daughter," to anyone who would listen. They had never been more proud of anything in their lives. Did you know she could play like that? Her mother asked her father through her tears. I had no idea, he replied, his voice full of wonder. I knew she was good at piano, but this was like listening to a professional concert. Around them, other parents and students were talking excitedly about what they had just heard. Sarah's classmates, who had barely noticed her in school, were now asking each other how long she had been playing piano and where she had learned to play like that. The applause continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Sarah slowly stood up from the piano bench, still not quite believing what was happening. Her legs felt shaky, but this time it was not from nervousness. It was from excitement and amazement. She took a small step toward the front of the stage and gave an awkward little bow. This made the audience cheer even louder. Someone in the back of the auditorium shouted, "Encore!" and other voices picked up the call. Sarah had never heard the word encore used in real life before. She knew it meant that the audience wanted her to play another song, but she had not prepared anything else. The arrangement of "The Way You Look Tonight" was the only piece she was supposed to perform. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the side of the stage and motioned for Sarah to come toward her. Sarah walked across the stage on unsteady legs, the applause still thundering around her. When she reached the wings, Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed her in a tight hug. "Sarah, that was the most beautiful performance I have ever heard at this school," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You took that simple song and turned it into pure magic." "I do not know what happened," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the continued applause. "I just felt like the music wanted me to keep playing." "That is exactly what happened. You stopped playing someone else's music and started playing your own. You became a true musician tonight." The applause was finally starting to fade, but people were still standing and talking excitedly. Sarah could hear fragments of conversations from the audience. "Who was that girl? I have never heard anything like that at a school concert. She should be playing in concert halls, not high school auditoriums. Where has she been hiding all this talent?" The master of ceremonies, Mr. Thompson, the drama teacher, walked onto the stage with a microphone. He had to wait for the audience to quiet down before he could speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that we have just witnessed something very special," he said into the microphone. His words brought another wave of applause. "Sarah Chun, ladies and gentlemen. Let us hear it one more time for that absolutely incredible performance." The audience erupted again, though not quite as loudly as before. Sarah waved from the wings, still feeling like she was in a dream. As the applause finally died down, Mr. Thompson continued with the show. "We have several more wonderful acts to share with you tonight, but first let us take a 10-minute intermission so everyone can process what we just experienced." The house lights came up, and Sarah could see the audience for the first time. Every single person was still standing. Many people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement, as if they could not believe what they had just heard. During intermission, word about Sarah's performance spread quickly. Through the lobby, parents who had stepped outside to get some air were telling other parents about the incredible piano performance they had just witnessed. Students were texting their friends who were not at the show, trying to describe what had happened. "You had to be there," one student kept saying. "I cannot explain it. She just took this simple song and made it into something unbelievable." Sarah stayed backstage during intermission, sitting in a corner of the music room and trying to understand what had just happened to her. Other performers came up to congratulate her, but she could barely respond. Her mind was still spinning from the experience. "Sarah, you were amazing," said Jennifer, a senior who was performing a violin piece later in the show. "I have been playing violin for 10 years, and I have never played with that kind of feeling." How did you learn to do that? I do not know, Sarah answered honestly. I just started playing and it felt like the music was playing itself. Mrs. Rodriguez sat down next to Sarah and put her arm around her shoulders. Sarah, do you realize what just happened? You discovered something very important about yourself tonight. You found out that you are not just someone who can play piano, you are someone who can create music. But I was so scared before I went on stage. I almost did not do it. The best musicians are always scared before they perform. The fear means that what you are doing matters to you. But when you sat down at that piano, the fear turned into something beautiful. When the show resumed after intermission, the remaining acts had a difficult job. The audience was still buzzing with excitement about Sarah's performance. Every other act, no matter how good, seemed small in comparison to what they had just experienced. Tom played his guitar song well, but the audience's applause was polite rather than enthusiastic. Jessica sang her Broadway number beautifully, but people were still talking quietly about the piano performance. They had heard earlier it was not that the other acts were bad. They were all talented students who had prepared well. But Sarah had done something that none of them had done. She had created a moment of pure magic that transformed a high school talent show into something much more important. As the show continued, word about Sarah's performance began to spread beyond the auditorium. Students who were not at the show started receiving texts and phone calls from friends who were there. Social media posts began appearing with descriptions like, "You will not believe what just happened at the talent show," and "This girl just gave the performance of a lifetime." By the time the show ended an hour later, Sarah's name was being mentioned throughout the school and the community. Parents were asking their children if they knew her. Teachers were wondering how such an incredible talent had been hiding in their school, but Sarah, sitting quietly in the music room as the final act performed, was not thinking about fame or recognition. She was thinking about the feeling she had experienced on stage, the feeling of complete freedom and connection with the music. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood who she really was. She was not just a shy girl who happened to play piano. She was a musician with something important to share with the world. The final act finished, and Mr. Thompson returned to the stage to thank everyone for coming. As he spoke, Sarah knew that her life had changed forever. She would never again be content to play simple arrangements exactly as written. She had tasted the joy of musical creation, and there was no going back. The curtain came down on the talent show, but for Sarah, it felt like the curtain was just rising on the rest of her life. After the final curtain call, the auditorium slowly emptied, but many people lingered in the lobby, still talking about Sarah's performance. Parents who had never met before were striking up conversations about what they had just witnessed. Students were comparing it to concerts they had seen by professional musicians. Sarah remained backstage, sitting in the quiet music room while the other performers gathered their belongings and left with their families. She felt like she needed a few minutes alone to process what had happened. The transformation she had experienced on stage felt too big to understand all at once. Mrs. Rodriguez found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting in the same chair, staring at her hands. "Sarah, your parents are waiting for you in the lobby. They are very eager to see you." Sarah looked up at her teacher. "Mrs. Rodriguez, what happened to me up there? I have never played like that before in my life." Mrs. Rodriguez sat down across from Sarah and smiled warmly. "What happened is that you stopped being afraid and started being yourself. All those weeks of practice gave you the foundation you needed. But tonight you built something beautiful on top of that foundation. I feel like a different person than I was this morning." In many ways, you are a different person. You discovered something about yourself that will change everything. You found out that you have a gift that can touch people's hearts. Sarah thought about this. She remembered the feeling of the audience's complete attention during her performance. The way the auditorium had felt electric with excitement. The sound of hundreds of people applauding with genuine enthusiasm. "I never knew music could feel like that," Sarah said. "When I was playing, it felt like I was having a conversation with the audience without using words. That is exactly what music is supposed to be, a conversation. A way of sharing emotions and experiences that are too deep for ordinary language. Mrs. Rodriguez reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Sarah, I want you to have this. It belongs to Dr. Patricia Young. She is a piano professor at the State University and she was in the audience tonight. Sarah took the card and read the name. A university professor was here? Her daughter performed in the dance routine earlier. But after your performance, she came backstage looking for you. She wants to talk to you about your musical future. Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervousness again, but this time it was mixed with excitement. What kind of future? That is something you will need to discuss with her and your parents. But Sarah, what you did tonight was not just a good high school performance. It was the kind of playing that suggests real professional potential. The word professional made Sarah's head spin. She had never thought of music as anything more than a hobby, something she enjoyed doing in her spare time. The idea that she might be good enough to make music her career seemed impossible. I should? Go find my parents, Sarah said, standing up slowly. Yes, you should. But first, I want you to know how proud I am of you. In 23 years of teaching, I have never had a student accomplish what you accomplished tonight. Sarah hugged Mrs. Rodriguez tightly. Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself. That is what teachers are for. Now, go, your family is waiting. Sarah walked through the empty hallways toward the lobby. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet building. It was strange to think that just an hour ago, these same hallways had been buzzing with excitement and nervous energy. When she reached the lobby, she saw her parents immediately. They were standing near the entrance, talking with several other parents. When her mother saw her, she rushed over and wrapped Sarah in the biggest hug of her life. Sarah, we are so incredibly proud of you, her mother said, tears streaming down her face again. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Her father joined the hug, squeezing them both tightly. Honey, where did that come from? I knew you were good at piano, but that was magical. I do not really know, Sarah said honestly. It just happened. As they talked, other people in the lobby began to notice Sarah. She found herself surrounded by parents and students who wanted to congratulate her. People she had never spoken to before were shaking her hand and telling her how much her music had moved them. Young lady, that was extraordinary, said an elderly woman whose granddaughter had performed earlier. I have been to many concerts in my life, and your performance tonight was as good as anything I have heard. A man in a suit approached them. Excuse me, are you Sarah's parents? I am Robert Martinez, Jessica's father. I just wanted to tell you that your daughter gave one of the most incredible performances I have ever witnessed. My wife and I were both in tears. Sarah's parents beamed with pride as they listened to one compliment after another. Sarah herself felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She was not used to being the center of this much positive focus. After about 15 minutes, a woman with kind eyes and gray hair approached their group. Excuse me, are you Sarah Chun? Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied. I am Dr. Patricia Yang from the University Music Department. I was hoping I could speak with you and your parents for a moment. Sarah's parents looked curious as Dr. Yang introduced herself more fully. She explained that she had been attending the talent show to watch her daughter perform, but Sarah's piano playing had captured her complete attention. In my 20 years of teaching at the university level, I rarely encounter students with the kind of natural musicality you displayed tonight, Dr. Yang said. The way you took that simple arrangement and transformed it into something so sophisticated and moving, that takes a rare combination of technical skill and artistic instinct. Sarah felt her cheeks turn red. She was not used to receiving such serious praise from adults she did not know. What does that mean? Her father asked. Dr. Yang smiled. It means that Sarah has the potential to pursue music at the highest levels. With the right training and guidance, she could have a very bright future as a professional musician. The word professional hung in the air. Sarah's parents looked at each other with amazement. They had always supported Sarah's piano lessons, but they had thought of music as a nice hobby, not a potential career. What would that involve? Her mother asked. Well, first, Sarah would need to continue developing her skills with a more advanced teacher, someone who specializes in preparing students for conservatory auditions. Then she could apply to music schools where she could study piano performance at the college level. Dr. Yang handed Sarah's father her business card. I would be happy to discuss this further with you when you have had time to think about it. But I wanted you to know that what Sarah did tonight was truly special. She has a gift that should be nurtured. As Dr. Yang walked away, Sarah's family stood in stunned silence. The idea that Sarah might have a future as a professional musician was so unexpected that none of them knew what to say. Sarah, what do you think about all this? Her father asked finally. Sarah thought carefully before answering. A few hours ago, she had been a shy student who was terrified of performing in front of people. Now, adults were talking about her potential professional career. It felt surreal, but when she thought about how she had felt on stage, creating music and sharing it with the audience, she knew her answer. I think I want to learn more, she said. Tonight showed me something about music that I never knew before. I want to explore that feeling. Her parents smiled and hugged her again. Then we will support you however we can, her mother said. If music is what makes you happy, then music is what we want for you. As they drove home that night, Sarah sat quietly in the back seat, watching the familiar streets pass by the window. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but she felt completely different. She thought about the moment on stage, when she had decided to keep playing beyond the planned arrangement. That decision had changed everything. It had shown her that she was capable of things she had never imagined. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. About Dr. Yang, who believed she had professional potential. About her parents, who were willing to support her musical dreams. But most of all, she thought about the music itself. The way it had felt to create something beautiful in real time. The way the audience had responded to her playing. The way music had become a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of hundreds of other people. When they arrived home, Sarah went straight to her small keyboard. She put on her headphones and began to play. Not the way you look tonight, but something new. Something that came from her own imagination. As her fingers moved across the keys, Sarah smiled. She was no longer the girl who hid in the back row of music class. She was a musician with something important to share with the world. The thunderous applause from the auditorium was still ringing in her ears, but it was no longer the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a beginning. The beginning of a life dedicated to creating and sharing beautiful music. Sarah played late into the night, exploring melodies and harmonies that existed nowhere except in her imagination. For the first time in her life, she understood exactly who she was meant to be. She was Sarah Chung, musician, and her journey was just beginning.